Welcome back to True Crime with Andy Hale. I've got my friend, wingman, person I love to talk true crime with, George Jared. He's been on this podcast before. True crime author, award-winning investigative journalist. He's covered murder cases and other news stories for nearly 2 decades. Featured speaker at CrimeCon in 2021 and 2022. Featured in the New York Times. Currently has his own podcast, Diamond State Murder Board, and also a member of Case Breakers, a national organization dedicated to solving some of the most notorious unsolved crimes, including the Zodiac murders, which we're going to talk about today. I'm so looking forward to this. Welcome back, George.
Thanks for having me, Andy. I'm glad to be back.
So, Zodiac Killer, I know you brought this up with me a few times, and Zodiac Killer, would you say, is maybe the most famous kind of cold case in U.S. history? I mean, it's got to be up there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of other like serial killings that haven't been solved. But this one made national news over and over again because the Zodiac would continuously send cryptic letters to newspapers and to the police. He would taunt them. And so it was just always in the news. And you know, Andy, there's this phenomenon, I've talked about it in the past, where if a certain news story happens on a certain day, it might not be a big story because there might be 5 other stories that are just bigger. But if it happens on where there's a news vacuum, if it happens on that particular day, and I'll give you an example, of Natalie Holloway. Remember the high school student who was murdered in Aruba?
Yeah.
You know, it was in May, I think, of 2005.
Jordan Vandersloot, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've actually interviewed some of her family members. Her dad is actually from the town I live in right now. And so it wasn't a big, huge story. I mean, it's a story. You know, a high school student gets murdered in a foreign country on vacation. But because it was in middle of May, not much going on, you know, it just grew legs. And, you know, you saw stories about that case everywhere for years.
Yeah, right. And it's you know, there's probably a spring break story every year, and that's one that's just had legs. So Zodiac Killer, to set the stage, I think there's 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between like December 68 and October 69. And like you said, I think the thing that's most fascinating about it is how this serial killer taunted the press and sent these messages. That's, to me, the creepiest, interesting, fascinating part about it. And I know I read something that said, like, I think in the mid-70s, he wrote a letter claiming he had, I don't know, 30-something victims. Like, there were a bunch more that, like, people didn't even know about it. But let's start at the beginning. How does Zodiac Killer get on your radar screen where you get involved in trying to, like, check it out?
So this is how it happened. I was at the gym one day. I think it was like...
yeah, at the gym one day. That's not where I thought you'd start. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was at the gym one day, and my friend Jennifer called me. Jennifer Buckholtz, who I work with, who co-wrote my last book. Her and I are investigative partners in a lot of the stuff that we work on. She had written a story about the Rebecca Gould murder case. That's a case you and I talked about previously.
Yep.
And she'd written it for AMU University, and a TV anchor, a morning show anchor in California, who was working in Salinas, California at the time, he read Jennifer's story, and he wanted to talk to her about behavioral analysis. And so she calls me up and says, hey, this guy has sent me, he's written a rough draft for a book because he thinks he's solved the Zodiac. He thinks he knows the identity of the Zodiac. And of course, as soon as I hear that, I'm getting in my car, rolling my eyes. I'm like, oh my God, okay. So she wanted to send me a rough copy of this rough draft of this book. And I was like, oh man, I don't even want to read this. This is going to be garbage. You know, when you work in the news business, Andy, you get tips all the time.
Everybody's solved the case. Everybody's got a theory. Everybody's got a...
Yeah, everybody knows. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it all 99% of the time turns out to be garbage. And so but he was a journalist. So I was like, okay, I take him, you know, pretty seriously. I probably read maybe, I don't even know how many pages, maybe 50 pages. And I was like, this guy, I think he solved it. I really believed it.
Wow.
And it was incredible. And so, to make a long story short, there's this organization called the Case
What
Breakers, and you kind of
what year was that though? When that happened? What year was that?
it was either late 2019 or early 2020. I remember it being cold, so it was some kind of in that time frame.
Okay. So you're talking about case breakers. Go ahead.
And so this national organization called the Case Breakers, and it's just a collection of former law enforcement, attorney, like prosecutors, people who've worked in, on criminal cases, journalists like me. Jennifer's was a former counterintelligence agent in the U.S. Army. So just a whole collection of people like her. And the Case Breakers take on, these high profile cases, like Zodiac and stuff like that. So they formed a Zodiac team, and they asked Jennifer Dale, the anchor, and me to be on that team, and my friend Justin Rimmel, who's also a podcaster out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so the four of us basically formed this team on this team, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so you formed the team, but then what? Do they give you access to like case materials, or do you interview this guy who reached out, this news anchor? Like where does it go?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I actually became friends with Dale, had many, many long conversations with him. He explained his methodology on how he came about it. And if you want me, I can kind of tell you the story about how he kind of got hooked into it. Now, most of what I'm about to tell you is stuff that Dale uncovered, but there may be some facts that are intertwined with things that we came up with as a team, too. But I want to give Dale full credit for this because he's the guy that did most of it.
What's his last name?
Julin. Dale Julin.
Where's he live?
He's actually retired now. He lives in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay. And he had been a newscaster in California?
Yes.
Was he a newscaster in California at the time of the murders?
No,
like late 60s?
He was a child then, or like maybe early teens. So he grew up, with the specter of the Zodiac. He remembers being a kid on the school bus. There was the Zodiac had sent a letter where he said he would love to, shoot the kiddies as they're coming off a bus or something like that. And so for a while, like sheriff's deputies would follow buses around after
Good
school.
God, that'll freak out all the parents in the neighborhood. So Tell me his story. How does he get hooked?
So Dale he had just gotten done doing the morning show. He's the anchor. They get a message that this homeless guy says he's on the run because the Zodiac is after him. And that he knows the identity of the Zodiac. And of course, and Dale said it. He said, George, if I had a nickel for every time somebody called up to the news station and said, hey,
right.
I know who the Zodiac is.
I'd be retired.
Yeah, he'd be done.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of interested, though. So he thought, you know what, I'll just take a shot on this. So they decide to take this homeless guy out for lunch. The guy orders like a $65 meal or something like that. And he gives him a name, and he tells him his story. And the story is that they called the Zodiac the old man. His name was Gary Francis Post. Okay. And they called him the old man. He was kind of like a mentor. Like he had a group of younger men that he mentored. They'd go hiking and hunting and fishing and all this other stuff. And so he had an association with this guy for years. And then he finally confronted the guy and said, hey, I think you're the Zodiac. And the guy went crazy on him and tried to kill him. And so Dale's like, okay, this is whatever story. So Dale just leaves it alone. Before he leaves with that guy, though, he did get the name. And so a couple days later, Dale is sitting at home, and, one of the famous aspects of the Zodiac story is these anagrams that he would send out, these cryptic letters where, how anagrams work.
Explain what an anagram is.
So an anagram is like where you have a series, like let's say you have a sentence, and but the sentence is saying something, but that's not the true meaning. If you rearrange the letters, you create a new sentence, which is what they really want said. And I'll give your listeners, I'll give you one right now that comes straight from the Zodiac.
Okay.
So in many of the letters that the Zodiac sent, there was always this phrase, please rush to editor. He always put that on like the envelope. So you write down, please rush to editor. And then write down author is Elder Post, and Post is last name is spelled with an E. So if you take all the letters out of the first sentence and take the same letters out of the second sentence, you will end up with 0. So that is an anagram. It says, please rush to editor, but actually what he's saying is author is Elder Post. And he loved to call himself Elder, according to all of his friends and family members that Dale talked to. Okay.
Hmm.
So try that out. And that's in almost all the letters. So Dale has his name, and one of the things about the Zodiac, and the FBI has suspected this for years, even if they don't admit it publicly, is that the Zodiac, in these letters, his name was in there. Like, if you could ever figure out his name, that would be kind of like a keystone to trying to figuring out exactly how some of these anagrams.
So he was kind of playing a little game like, I'm giving you my name, but you're not going to be able to figure it out.
Right. And so, well, and he also called himself the Clown Prince of Crime, which is a reference to the Joker from Batman.
Mm.
And that's actually going to be key here later on. Also, when Gary Francis Post was a child, one of the figures that came out in the Batman series was the Riddler. And there's a lot of evidence that he was into that kind of stuff, that he fascinated. Obviously, he did, because the Joker calls, that's exactly what the Joker calls himself in that series, in that comic series. So anyway, so Dale's got his name, and he's got one of the anagrams. So then he decides, okay, can I find his name in here? It's Gary Francis Post. Very specific name, and the last name is specific. Well, he sits there for a while. He goes through it, and he goes through it, and he goes through it, and then finally he gets to the end, and in this one letter, he can't find a T. He's like, he said, I guess this isn't right. I'm missing a T. There's no way. And then all of a sudden, he looks down at the anagram, because he circled the letters that he had used up, Gary Francis Post. Those letters form a T.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and I wish I had the slideshow that we...
gosh.
Yeah, and it's if you can see it visually, I do presentations where I'll Jennifer and I will go through and we'll circle, 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 and then all of a sudden line.
So hold on, let me go back a second. The homeless guy, okay, he gives the name of Gary Francis Post, like he identifies the name of the Zodiac Killer?
Yes.
And what is it about the homeless guy that allows him to know this, or like how does he know this?
He was associated with Gary Francis Post for many years. He was just part of a group of men that would go out, like they would go on hunting and fishing trips up in the Sierra Mountains, up around Lake Tahoe in California. They would hang out a lot. And through the years, this guy just was like putting little pieces together. And then finally, it just dawned on him that, hey, this guy is actually the Zodiac.
Wow.
And this guy had a pretty violent history. In fact, if you want, we can go through the Gary Francis Post history if you want.
We'll get there. So let's keep going. This is interesting. So the anagram. So now the news guy, Dale, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's now kind of trying to figure this out. So what kind of happens next?
So he just starts looking for this guy's name in these anagrams, and he finds it in every letter that he studied. Now, sometimes it took him a while to figure it out, because Post would always throw in kind of like a monkey wrench, like I said about the T. But then Dale started noticing something else too. In some of these anagrams, he was finding music lyrics from songs that were popular around the time that he sent the letters. So like in one anagram, there's a lyric, Bye Bye Birdie or something like that. And then there was this real famous one that he sent, and it was around, it was in winter, and it was Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow. And so, yeah, and it worked every time. And so it got to the point where Dale decided to go to the FBI. He's like,
with what he had.
Yes.
Okay. So, and let me pause you there. Today, is it possible, I would think, like with AI and the advancements in technology, to feed all those letters into some kind of computer program, and AI could spit out what's depicted in there?
I would think it's possible. I'm not familiar enough with solving anagrams or with AI in that particular.
I feel like that's a computer issue, but all right. So go ahead. So I'm sure that's out there. That's very curious. We'll have to check that out. But he goes to the FBI with what he knows.
Yes, he goes to the FBI.
Do they tell him like you're out of your mind?
No, they interviewed him for several hours.
Really?
They did. They interviewed him for several hours, and and I believe the guy's name is Chris Avery. Maybe Chris Avery. I think that's his name. That's
The
the
homeless
homeless
guy?
guy. I think that's his name. I know his last name's Avery. But they interviewed him too. And spoiler alert, the FBI will not say that they have a primary suspect in this case. We have an informant inside the FBI, and since 2016, Gary Francis Post has been their top suspect.
Really?
And, yes, and this is after Dale went
Is this
to them.
public at all? Does anybody know this? Is this in the mainstream media?
Yeah, it has been covered by the mainstream media. In fact, the FBI had to. It's been covered by I think CNN and Fox News both had stories about it. I know.
I gotta up my game because that's interesting if that's out there.
Yeah. In fact, it got to the point where the FBI had to release. They released a statement saying we cannot confirm or deny that Gary Francis Post is our primary suspect. But here's the thing, Andy. Being in the news business, this is what I know. If an alien spaceship lands on the south lawn of the White House today and nobody sees it, or one or two people see it, the government will say we cannot confirm or deny that a spaceship landed there. If no spaceship landed there, they're going to come out and say no spaceship landed there. So if this guy wasn't a suspect, they would just come out and say, hey, he's not a suspect. Okay, so just move on.
So when Dale goes to the FBI, did the FBI already have Gary Francis Post on their radar screen?
We don't know that. We think they probably did, but we don't know for sure because obviously the FBI doesn't share. They're not going to share case file information with anybody.
So is this kind of where it stalls out, like in the sense of like that's kind of where it's at right now?
No, actually, what happened was so he goes to the FBI and he also went to other police agencies too. He went and talked to the San Francisco police. They met with him. He met with police officers. Actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So one of the most famous letters that the Zodiac sent was the Halloween card. It has this dancing skeleton on it. And in that card, there's a reference to Donna Lass. She was a nurse who went missing from State Line, California back in 1970. And her body's never been found. Well, the Zodiac wrote 3 letters talking about Donna Lass. And so Dale was looking at this card and he started deciphering some things about it. And he deciphered while he was going through it that the Zodiac had claimed that her body was up in a tree in a bear catch, that he had killed her, boiled her body, boiled her down to her bones, and then he had put her in this tree. Okay?
What?
Put her bones up in a tree.
Good God.
And so he called like the Coast Guard who works called a guy at the Coast Guard who works in Lake Tahoe because he was also able to come up with the name of Zephyr Cove, this really remote cove out in the middle of nowhere on Lake Tahoe. So he calls the Coast Guard, and there's like these weird symbols on it, like the Zodiac has that that crosshair symbol which is it's weird though. It doesn't look like exactly like a crosshair. And I'm going to get to that in a minute because this is very interesting. So up in the corner of the card, there's like that symbol, but it doesn't look like it normally looks in other, like the other times he used it. It's off. It's off center even more so. And then there's this weird symbol on the other side. Well, he calls the Coast Guard, a guy at the Coast Guard up, and he sends him a picture of what he's talking about. And immediately the Coast Guard guy goes, well, that symbol over there, that's wind bar. It's giving you directional coordinates is what it's doing. And that other symbol up here is actually, it's a radar symbol. And it's called the boogeyman signal because it's when a radar operator knows there's something out there, but they can't identify it. They know something's there, but they don't know what it is.
Oh, wow. That's creepy.
Yeah. And so this is the Halloween card. And so basically he gets the coordinates. And Gary Francis Post was an avid like he loved to travel around in an RV. He also was a house painter. So he always had 40-foot ladders. So to make a long story short, they take these coordinates. They go out to this remote place in Lake Tahoe. The police go with them. Detectives go with them. That a local person with a 40-foot ladder comes up. A detective goes up there, and sure enough, there's the remnants of a bear catch at 40 feet up this tree.
Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah. And so at this point, the police bring in a cadaver dog. The dog went Went for about an hour. He was roaming around, but again, you're out in the middle of the woods, and I've tried to explain this to people. If that bear catch fell apart and her bones fell out, I mean, they could be anywhere at this point, you know. And finding a body is really even like a body, you know, out in the woods. It's hard to find. I mean, people think it's, you know, would be easy. It's not. I mean, people disappear all the time, and then their remains are found, you know, 500 feet from where they were last seen.
Yeah.
I covered a case one day, Andy, where this little boy fell into this very not very into a like a I say river. It was more like a creek. It's a river, but it's not very. It wasn't deep. It wasn't rushing. It took them 4 days to find him. They found him 100 feet from where he fell in.
Wow.
And they had dive teams everywhere. So people who think that this is easy, it's not. And especially when you're out in the wilderness. Dale had begged them to do like an extensive grid search of that area, but to this point they haven't done it. The Zodiac, Gary Francis Post, he actually went to prison for throwing his wife down some steps. And he actually confided in two of his cellmates that he was the Zodiac.
Really?
Yes. And one of them asked him about Donna Lass, and he said, "Why would you put her in a tree?" And he said, "Everyone looks for a body on the ground. Nobody looks up."
Oh, my gosh. When did he die?
He died in 2018.
Dang.
And Dale did get to talk to him once.
He did?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he called him. His cellmates actually would call Dale all the time and rat him out. And he told his cellmates, he says, "I cannot believe that this TV anchor figured out that I'm the Zodiac." He said he couldn't believe it.
So Dale actually talked to Gary Francis Post?
Yes. He was talking to one of his jailhouse snitches. The guy was on the phone, and Gary Francis Post was walking by, and the snitch says, "Hey, you want to talk to him? He's walking by right now." And he goes, "Yeah." So he puts him on the phone. Of course, Dale, being a journalist, first thing he asks him, he goes, "Why did you kill Donna Lass?" And he says, "I don't want to talk about that." And then he asked him about his other victims, like 3 or 4. "Why'd you kill the cab driver? Why'd you kill that couple out by the lake in 1968? And after the third time, he screamed, "I don't want to talk about that anymore," and then acted like he fell down or passed out. Phone falls down. And the guy picked up the phone and goes, "Man, you really pissed him off." And
wow.
Yeah, so he died he wasn't in prison anymore. He was in like a secured facility because he was older. He was about 80 at this point. So but
he was just like this house painter. Like, was he ever married? Did he have a family or anybody, or where did he live?
He had a wife. He lived in the San Francisco Bay Area during the Zodiac killings. And so let me give you a little history on Mr. Gary Francis Post.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Gary Francis Post was a radar operator in the U.S. Army, or U.S. Air Force, excuse me,
okay.
In the 50s. In 1959, he and a friend were out drinking one night, and they get into a horrible car wreck where the friend gets killed, and Gary Francis Post actually went through the windshield. So you remember all the pictures of Zodiac, he always has this real prominent feature right here across his forehead. Well, Gary Francis Post has a prominent feature there because he'd have surgery. He nearly died. It nearly killed him.
Wow.
Well, when he got back out of the hospital, you go through the front gate and I think this is a Air Force base in Indiana at this point. The general who was in charge of that base actually took the car and put it out front, this wrecked up car, and says, "Don't be like these guys, don't drink and drive." And so Gary Francis Post was humiliated by this. Well, then finally his superiors decided it was time to punish him for what he did. And so they shipped him to the worst duty station you could possibly have on the face of the earth if you're a radar operator, and they sent him to Greenland. Now,
oh, goodness.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting. So when you go to Greenland, you go on a big boat, and then you have to get on a little boat that ferries you over to the island. You know what those little boats are called? Zodiacs.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he gets on the Zodiac and gets over there. So he's stuck there for like 2 years. And so all he gets to do is stare at this radar screen. And by the way, that crosshair symbol is a radar screen. Because if you ever look at it, it doesn't look quite right because it kind of bends. Because radar screens bend because they got to bend to the curvature of the earth. So he's over there. Well, then he comes back to the States. And he gets out of the military and he works as a house painter. That's his job for 40 plus years. And so, interestingly enough, we don't think that this case is going to be the case. Any of the known Zodiac murders, we don't think that's the case that's gonna crack this thing open. We actually think it's a case that the FBI denies is a Zodiac case, but we had a memo from 1974 that was leaked to us that states that there's a girl named Sherry Jo Bates. She was killed in Riverside, California on October 30th, 1966.
Oh, even earlier.
Yes. And I'll tell you why we think that he is possibly the murderer in that case. So Sherry Jo Bates was in the library studying that night. She's a college student. She's 18. She comes out to her car. Someone had messed with her car, like messed with the battery cable or something. And so her car won't start. And then they viciously attack her. They drag her into an alley in between two houses. And quite literally, her killer nearly decapitates her.
Goodness.
At the crime scene, they find a watch that was purchased in Great Britain that had paint splatter.
Interesting.
If you're in Greenland, when you go for R&R, you're going to go to Great Britain. It's much closer. And so there was a size 10 wing walker boot print in the dirt next to her body. He wore wing walkers, and he is a size 10.
What are wing walkers? Is it a brand of shoe, or?
It's just a type of shoe they use in the Air Force.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And so the reason that Sherry Jo Bates is the key, I'll add this in too. He was receiving treatment at a local military medical facility in that area at this time. And whoever killed her also wrote a cryptic message. It went into the library after her murder and carved a cryptic message into a desk or something like that. And I don't know what the message is. I never got to see it. Yeah. So, and then the Zodiac at one point, one of his letters says, I see that you've been looking into my Riverside activity.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And
did he have a commonality in terms of how he killed, like the manner? Like, was there any signature?
No, and that's
techniques?
No, nothing. He would shoot, stab, didn't matter. He had no MO when it came to that, and that's kind of one of the problems with trying to figure him out is that he killed males and females. He killed it. Sometimes it seemed like it was random, like when he just randomly killed the taxi driver. We don't know if it was random, but it seems random. Or when he would come up on these lovers' lanes and, try to kill these couples, and sometimes one would survive and one wouldn't. The thing about Sherry Jo Bates is before she died, she was able to rip a handful of hair off of her attacker. They still have those hairs to this day, and they could compare them to Gary Francis Post if they wanted to, but Riverside doesn't think that she's a Zodiac victim, so they won't do it.
Well, hold on there. Let's talk about that. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a hair that Sherry Jo Bates, it's not her hair. It's a hair that she would have in her tussle with her attacker.
Yes.
And it's been impounded and it's in evidence somewhere?
Yes.
Okay. The reason that caught my attention, I think you and I probably talked about this in my Starved Rock Murders case, 1960. Okay. There's, thank God for this, whoever this crime scene investigator was in 1960 that had the foresight to take these hairs on Francis Murphy's glove and inventory them. And fast forward, little could that person have known that 60 years later, we could get a DNA profile from that hair. And we could then also do genetic genealogy and trace that hair back to one of three local brothers. So that hair, especially ones that get pulled out, like in my case, in the Starved Rock Murders, because it appears it got pulled out during the struggle, there was root material on there. Root material means you're going to have a much better chance of getting DNA testing or genetic sequence. I wonder if that hair has the clue, and I wonder how that works. Maybe who has standing to test that hair? Meaning, I would think the family maybe could say, we want to test this. I wonder if somebody like you or me, if we said to the local Riverside Police Department, hey, we're willing to pay for expert testing. We're willing to pay to have a lab do DNA testing. We're willing to pay for Othram, who's the most amazing lab in Texas doing the genetic genealogy. Did you go to their CrimeCon conference? Were you in Nashville? Did you see that at all?
Oh, yeah.
David Middleman. I mean, unbelievable what they're doing. So I wonder if like we could do it if we just offered to pay for it.
We've offered. We've done everything under the sun to try to get them to test this. We've tried to pressure them in many, many different ways.
I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand. If there's somebody out there with credentials, it's not like we're just two whack jobs, right? Like you've got this long resume of investigative journalism, solving cases. You've got somebody willing to put in the time and money to help solve it. How could you not, with open arms, say, come on down tomorrow? I'll be here. What time do you want to be here? Like I'll have a cup of coffee and some donuts waiting for you. What time do you want to be here? Like, I don't get that. What? I mean, that's just crazy to me.
Andy, it doesn't make any sense to me at all either.
Wow.
And here's the thing.
We're gonna continue this conversation once this podcast is over. We're gonna talk about this more. So we might have a part 2 where it'll probably be like, yeah, they told us to go pound sand, but we're gonna try again. But go ahead. What are you gonna say?
Here's what's crazy. I think I'm right about this. I think they have actually tested those hairs. They had other suspects in that case.
Uh-huh.
And they've tested that hair against their DNA, and they were able to eliminate 2 other people as suspects so far. So it's not like they're unwilling to do testing on these hairs. For whatever reason, they just won't test it against post DNA, and I don't understand it.
Well, and here's the thing with genetic genealogy. Like, so in the Starved Rock murders, the case was 3 women murdered in 1963, like wealthy women from the Chicago suburbs. So we get a DNA sample. We get a profile. It's a male, not Chester Weger, my client, the guy that got charged and convicted of the murders. But there's now this DNA database called CODIS, right? CODIS did not get formed until I think the late 90s. So anytime anybody got arrested, their DNA got put into this national database, right? So obviously in 1960, that person's DNA is not in a national database. And I'll give you an example of the Idaho murders. The killer, those college students that got murdered in their house in Idaho,
mm-hmm.
The killer left behind a knife sheath. That was a big screw up. They take that knife sheath, they get a DNA profile, but they then do genetic genealogy, and they wind up linking the knife sheath to that guy, Brian Koberger. My point is, Brian Koberger had not been arrested. His DNA was not in any kind of database. So here, the Zodiac Killer, I mean, whether he was or wasn't in any DNA database, genetic genealogy could potentially pinpoint who he was.
Right.
So I just don't understand. We're going to talk to David Middleman about this. I got a question for you. I'm looking at, I'm going to embarrass myself by even mentioning this. The Wikipedia article on Zodiac Killer. Okay, I know
mm-hmm.
that's not some big official source, but it is have information. And I'll read you a line. It says, despite many theories about the Zodiac's identity, the only suspect authorities ever named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. What do you know about him? And then why would authorities name him but not Gary Francis Post?
I think that they named him many years ago. Things have changed as far as the police used to have a close working relationship with the media back in the day. I've literally
it was more like friendly. Like now I think it's considered like we're enemies, which it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when I very first started off in the media, it wasn't uncommon, like a lot of police departments didn't have digital cameras. And so sometimes, you would go and take pictures for them at a crime scene. Like you were there, you would just take the pictures and give them to them. And that was no big deal. I mean, Andy, early on in my career, I went with the drug task force on drug raids, and I would ride around in the cop car with them. And, I watched
your DNA's probably in a lot of crime scenes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it could be. I watched the dude get his hand blown off right in front of me. I mean, his fingers landed like right near my foot. I mean,
wow.
So, but it's not like that now. That is not the relationship that they have with the media now. So I think there's this thing where they don't want to name any more suspects because that one kind of blew up in their face. I would have to I've read on him before. Obviously, when I very first started doing this, I don't think that there was ever any real information real evidence that pinpointed to him. I think it was statements that he made. You know, he had like some kind of close proximity, and he had an interest in anagrams and people and all this other stuff. One of the reasons I would not pin it on him is if he's a sex predator, you would think that if he was going to commit these horrific crimes in any way, you would think that he would be more geared toward what his obsession was, which, you know,
like a sexual component to all of
right.
that.
You know, like Ted Bundy, you know, like he wanted to have sex with these women and kill them. So you would think there would be some element of that in the Zodiac killings. Oh, and I will say this too. Well, there's only 5 confirmed Zodiac victims. The FBI thinks there could be as many as 13. And that's, again, another memo that got leaked to us where they said it's very probable that there are 8 other victims. And that's sort of some of the problem with solving some of these anagrams. Like Donna Lass was someone that he talked about a lot, that nurse. He wrote 3 letters about it. He would taunt the police. He would talk about it snowing on her head and stuff like that because he knew she was up in that tree up in the mountains. And so the problem is that if he doesn't give you a specific name, and if you don't think that, like, let's say, you know, Sherry Jo Bates, if you don't think that she's a victim, it's harder to solve the anagrams if you know you're having to look for like a specific name like that. But I'll give you a little interesting tidbit if you want it.
Sure.
So you know the movie Dirty Harry, right?
Of course.
Okay. And the villain in that is a guy called Scorpio. And Scorpio is a carbon copy of the Zodiac. Okay, the whole story. I mean, in the first Dirty Harry movie, the famous scene at the end is when, you know, the kids are coming off the school bus and Dirty Harry's there with that, you know, 357 Magnum, you know, that he's always got.
Yeah.
And so Clint Eastwood played Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood's mother lived in the San Francisco Bay Area when all this was going on. And Zodiac actually referenced Dirty Harry, and he actually didn't really like Clint Eastwood playing. Oh. Yeah, and he didn't really like all that, and he actually mentioned it in several letters. Guess who had their house painted during this time? Clint Eastwood's mother.
Oh my gosh.
Guess who painted her house?
No.
Gary Francis Post.
Wow.
And we think
super interesting.
We think that he actually painted the house twice.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I don't know if you know this, Jennifer's originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where she grew up. And so her and I have actually contemplated going to the house and seeing, like, with some type of like light, if we could got up in the ceiling, if maybe he left a message up there.
Oh, that's so interesting. Wouldn't that be crazy? You know, I saw something in the article I read that said in one of his letters, like in 1974, he claimed there were 37 other victims.
Yep.
So I don't know. I feel like somebody who is, I feel like what he's saying in those letters is more likely true than not true. So I think if he's saying he's got 37 other victims, he probably does. Like, I don't have any reason to say that's bullshit. Like, the guy's killing people. Yeah. He doesn't need to embellish his resume, you know? I mean, so that is super interesting. So tell me this, what's the status today? Is anything active? Is anything being done? Can anything be done? Like, what's the status now?
Unfortunately, we don't know what the status is because the FBI won't tell you anything. I mean, having dealt with the FBI on several cases, you know, Andy, this is no joke. I had a case one time back in 2013 where this guy was about to testify. He was about to turn on this drug ring. There were 8 people who had been charged of one of the biggest meth operations in the Mid-South. He was set to testify in federal court. 3 days before he's set to testify, they find him dead in his apartment. He'd been shot in the head, execution style. And so I actually went to his apartment. I found out about it. I saw the bloody mattress. I called the FBI. I'm like, hey, did this guy get murdered? And they're like, no. Now, mind you, there are convictions in this case already, at least one conviction. They still won't admit that the guy got murdered to me. If I called them today and asked them, they still won't admit it. I mean, that's how.
Yeah.
So
You talked about this hair that Sherry Jo Bates, grabbed from her attacker. To your knowledge, is there any other physical evidence collected at any of the Zodiac crime scenes that would have the potential for DNA? And what I mean by that is hairs, blood, fingerprints, anything like that?
I think I'm right about this. The taxi cab driver, I think they were able to get a partial on that. They weren't able to get a complete. And we've tried to get some of Gary Francis Post's DNA. I'm not sure. I don't think he's in CODIS, even though he was in prison for a while. Andy, I'll tell you one thing that we've been finding out is I think people in this space, you being an attorney and a podcaster, and Jen and I were talking about this. We thought for sure that a suspect in another case, he should have been in CODIS. Like he should have been. We'll come to find out he wasn't. Like he
not a perfect system.
It is not. And I told Jim that I suspected this for a while, that us in this space who believe, oh well, they've got his DNA and he has to be in CODIS because he's a convicted felon. Well, guess what? I have a suspicion that a lot of them aren't.
Really? Are these? Do you know if those former cellmates are still alive?
I'm not sure about that. I will say this.
Let's get those guys on the podcast. Let's get. Is Dale still alive?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why don't we get Dale on the podcast?
We can do that. I can hook you guys up.
Let's do it. We'll have the three of us. Let's have that be part 2.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear his story. And I'll tell you one part about your story. It kind of reminds me of things I talk about on my Connect podcast. And my Connect podcast is more about kind of like life lessons, creating your own opportunities, inspiration, motivation. So what I give Dale credit for is you got a homeless guy basically telling you he knows something about the Zodiac killers. I think most people would have just blown it off. And I think something, and this is what I would like to ask him if we ever talk to him, something inside of him was saying, you know what, you need to talk to this guy. Something inside of him, some kind of energy, call it what you want, a vibration, a gut feeling, whatever you want to call it, said, you got to talk to this guy. It might sound like it's crazy, but go spend some time with this guy and look where that led. Isn't that wild?
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that kind of Dale's antennas started going up. So the homeless guy sent him a picture of Gary Francis Post, and Gary Francis Post was gutting this deer, like from one end to the other. And the first thing Dale said he noticed was his forehead. Really? Because that was such a thing about the artist depictions of the Zodiac, was this forehead thing. Interesting. And he said, as soon as I saw it, he's like, man, he goes, I've got to at least take a flyer on this one. Wow. So last thing before we wrap up, are the case breakers, is this case kind of on pause now, or like have the case breakers kind of exhausted the available resources to investigate? No, we've actually, we're trying to get Gary Francis Post DNA one way. He's deceased, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get his DNA through relatives, see if somebody will agree to do some DNA testing. We've also got, we acquired, I don't know if we acquired it, but I know that we did some testing on some like gun shell casings that he was known to fire. So we thought maybe he touched one, maybe there's still some DNA, but I don't think that turned out. I think Jennifer actually paid a couple $1,000s at least to have those DNA tested. We also tried to test a mat, like a camping mat that he had taken out. What I would love to find out, and again, like, I don't know how this works. Like, I don't know if case breakers could get access, knowing that case breakers is this reputable organization of, law enforcement people and people coming from like law enforcement and investigative backgrounds. I would love to have an evidence inspection of all of the 5 cases, the known 5 cases, just to see what is still there. Because what happens a lot of times, I've been to a lot of evidence inspections, there might be something in a baggie that's not noted on a paper file, but you're like, oh shit, there's like a Coke can? Somebody collected a Coke can? That, what's up with the Coke can? That you could maybe swab for DNA, or like, who knows what's sitting on a dusty, dark shelf right now in the basement of some evidence facility in Bumble Knucklehead, wherever, that is the key to the whole case, It's like in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, that last scene where they like
They just take the ark and they just wheel it into that huge warehouse, never to be seen again. You know, it's like there's a clue out there right now sitting somewhere collecting dust that's just waiting to be discovered. So I think we're going to end it here. I want to try to do a part 2 when we're ready. We'll come back. Maybe we'll talk to Dale. Maybe we'll have an update on whether we can get access to evidence. I think that'd be an interesting topic about if we can, that'd be huge. And if we can't, why not? Why not? Like I'd like to learn more about that, because there shouldn't be those kinds of impediments when all you're trying to do is get closure and solve a case. So
yeah.
Any last words?
Yeah, I'll plug. Dale actually has a book out about the case now. It's called Catching Zodiac. So if you're more into reading,
I'm going to have to read it. I'm going to have to read it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good book. He's a good. He
have you written a book about Zodiac?
No, I have not.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not the expert that Dale is on this.
Okay.
Him and I've had many conversations about it, and I'm obviously on the team, and I know a lot about it.
Catching Zodiac.
Catching Zodiac. You can get it on Amazon.
I'm going to check it out. Next time we're at this podcast, I'm going to hold it up and say I'm going to tell you all about it. George Jared, I could talk to you for hours, brother. You always have the most interesting, crazy scenarios. You always have these stories where, like, yeah, I was in the gym and this happened, or I was here and something happened. Like, your stories are. I think there's something about you, and I don't. This is something I would talk about on my Connect podcast. It's not a coincidence, the stuff that happens to you. Okay. All the examples of weird stuff that's happened to you is happening because of you're creating these situations where through your vibe, your energy, your gut, whatever's inside of you, your imagination is putting you in these weird spots where what looks to you are these weird things. It's putting you where you need to be, that you're getting the information you need to get. Like I fully believe that. We'll have you on the Connect podcast to talk about all the George Jared weird coincidence over the year. You could write a book about that. To be continued. Great seeing you. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely, Andy. It's good seeing you.